We're live.
All right, great. So this is the Human Rights Commission. It's April 25th, 2022. It's 5:30 on the dot. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with state open meeting law, consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the Gloucester Human Rights Commission during this and future remote meetings will be by roll call vote. If you're calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. And if you're watching on a computer or a device, there is a raise hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. Please use either of these options during oral communications to be recognized to speak. All right, so we'll call to order. I will do a roll call. If you'll just say that you're here. Tony?
Here.
Mayuza Alves?
Yeah.
Sarah Peck?
Here.
Jason Grow?
Here.
Holly Dugwillow?
Here.
And I am here, Hannah Kimberly. Do we want to make a motion to approve the minutes from last time?
I'll move to approve.
Okay,
And I'll second.
great. Is there any discussion on the minutes at all? Okay, so we want to approve the minutes. Tony,
Yes.
Mayuza,
Yes. Sarah?
Sarah, and Hannah, yes. Okay, so our next thing on the agenda is the Juneteenth update. So Mayor Verga is happy for us to join in on the planning for this year's celebration. Tony Armstrong had asked that we come up with ideas for how we, the commission, can contribute to the day. Does anyone want to work with me on that outside of this meeting? Is anyone interested? Somebody? Don't maybe do it alone.
All right, I'll join you, Hannah. I don't want you, don't you feel left out.
Thank you, Tony. I think it'll be a great time. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, and we could add some sort of educational component to it.
I'm sorry, I'm not volunteering. It's because I might have a tentative travel work trip during that time.
Okay.
So I just don't know if I'll be around.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I'll get
Is
you on
it-
something else. Don't you worry.
Is this the event that's taken place at the
Stageport. Yeah.
stage, but I was thinking the museum.
Oh, no, I lied to you. It was at
Okay.
Stageport last year. It will be at the museum.
Okay.
Thanks, Holly, for asking that. Also, Mayor Verga is happy for us to work with the Gloucester Coalition for the Prevention of Domestic Abuse. I attended the Take Back the Night rally this month, and it was very moving and very uplifting. Sunny Robinson, they do like 3 events a year, and Sunny Robinson wants us to get more involved, which would be great. And she's also asked if any of us are interested in joining their monthly meetings on Tuesday. I don't remember which Tuesday it is. I'm teaching on Tuesdays in the middle of the day. Is there probably no one else that is free on Tuesdays in the middle of the day?
Well, I suppose I shouldn't admit being retired, you know, I mean,
You're gonna get on every list, you know that.
yeah, I know.
You must have a part-time job that should.
Well, I do. I teach college writing part-time. Actually, I've been in the midst of, but that's on Saturdays and online. So I can't really use that as an excuse.
It's all coming out now, Tony. You are in so much trouble.
I know.
Well, why don't I send you that information, Tony?
Okay.
And then, if you can go when you can, that would be, that would be great. Okay, our next thing is citywide ordinance for non-discrimination. And that's you, Sarah.
Okay, so long story short, I did a little bit of research in terms of cities that have ordinances like this. There are actually not that many. It's a little surprising. There's only 6 in Massachusetts. So I did some review and they really run the gamut. Like if you go to the city of San Francisco, for example, and look at their ordinances around non-discrimination, they're extremely comprehensive. They're long, they provide tons of definitions, and they're tied to a lot of legal mandates. Whereas, then they're like these kind of much shorter non-discrimination clauses. Salem's is kind of brief. So what I've done, and it's hard. So the complexity here, I think, for us is to determine what the kind of mandate is in terms of enforcement and what it's tied to. Is it tied to local laws? Is it tied to like the mandate of the Human Rights Commission? Is it tied to internal ordinances within Gloucester? But I can kind of share. Oh, I was going to share my screen for what I've done a basic draft, and then I've done a basic kind of call out where I think we would need some sort of legal review or legal understanding of how it would get enforced. And a lot of the ordinances that exist go back to both the laws within the state or the Human Rights Commission themselves. So I don't know if I can share my screen or if this is something that I should read out loud. It's a little bit long.
Holly, can you
Sarah,
make it?
Can I just ask a question before you go on? Are these discrimination laws, are they aimed at employment or are they aimed at, because we have an EOE form that's in our ordinance. I'm just wondering, is this separate from
Yes,
that?
they're separate. They're like
Okay.
general non-discrimination ordinances. So again, some of the cities have them that are tied to like employment, that are tied to housing, that are tied to like very specific legal mandates. But then most of them are like these kind of broad citywide ordinances. So it would say something to the effect of nobody would be denied equal treatment based on age, ancestry, disability, family status, sex, sexual orientation, yada, yada, yada. Then there would be kind of a policy and an enforcement mechanism. So it's a general non-discrimination clause that would cover all of the bases. For example, what we were talking about with like renting public property.
Yeah, well, the city does in their contracts, unlike the school, does have a non-discrimination clause for any of those that contract with the city.
Sure.
So there is already a precedent that the city does for that particular section there.
But I think this would be broader and
Right.
it would be like a blanket citywide
Right.
policy. And it
Right.
would put Gloucester kind of at like the forefront of, because just cities don't have these. A lot of cities don't have these.
Right, but I agree. And I think that since the city already has something already in their contracting piece, it's not as if we don't have anything at all. So to kind of move up into the next step.
How would this differ from existing state and federal protections though? I mean, would they be, they can't be more stringent.
I don't think it would be more stringent. I actually think that the state and federal protections would be exactly what we could point to for it, like city enforcement. But again, like these are legal pieces that I think would need to be reviewed. I don't understand the legal mechanisms of enforcement when cities adopt ordinances like this.
Right.
But I think it's a commitment at the city level to enforce.
Is it an ordinance or is it more of a, this is our policy? I mean, policy and ordinances are a little different.
From what I can understand and what I've done research, these are all like all the cities that I've looked at, they're listed in like the Muni Code of Ordinances for each city. So I believe they're ordinances.
Which cities did you find these in?
Well, Salem has one, Cambridge, Mass has one, Arlington, Northampton, Amherst, and I think there's one other in Massachusetts has.
All hippie towns.
We can join.
That's right. All right, and I'm gonna check that out.
So in terms of next steps, I don't know how to proceed with this exactly, Hannah. I could send this basic draft to you. I don't know if this would need to go through a legal review. It would have to be approved by the council, obviously. And it does, again, raise the question of the mandate of the Human Rights Commission in terms of like who it gets bounced back to if there's a complaint.
Well, I think that follows in regards to, and which kind of moves me right, kind of connects with the topic that on the agenda, because at our last meeting, because I did that long reading about as I reviewed the ordinance and questions about that, why the T. So I did send an email to the mayor, and he forwarded it on to the lawyer to review. I did email the mayor this morning to ask if there was any update, because, you know, I imagine the lawyer's very busy, just to, you know, get an update. But I would think that it would be the same, that whatever the ordinance is, he would first probably want to have the lawyer review it to ensure for whatever compliance or, you know, whatever issues are. So he is reviewing that, because we did raise the issue that, you know, there's, you know, in the ordinance, we have no teeth. There are some things that we can say, but, you know, but there is, you know, there's nothing in there. Or that there's areas that it appears that we have some power, but it's unclear. So we're just waiting back to hear from the lawyer. So I would imagine the same process would go with the ordinance before it would then go, because all ordinances, Jason, aren't all ordinances generated from the city council?
Yep. Well, we'd be the legislative aspect of this. I mean, it's the, you know, the city council can put forward an ordinance. We would ask for the same kind of review in advance of that. I mean, I think that the trick you've touched on already is, what's the mechanism for enforcement? What's the authority of the Human Rights Commission to act on anything? Concern was raised to me today about whether or not the Human Rights Commission could take anonymous complaints, and how could they take information that would be normally confidential or you know, or used for an investigative body like the police or the attorney general or whatnot. Do they have the authority to keep that information from the public in advance of a resolution? So, you know, some resolution at the enforcement level, which should either be police, state, or federal. So, I mean, I think there's some genuinely important questions to ask about what it is that the Human Rights Commission can do legislatively in terms of creating an ordinance. I mean, obviously the Human Rights Commission operates as a board through the ordinance and then also by appointment of the mayor. But does it have any of its own power in the
Right.
sense of?
That's
can it
one of the
operate?
questions. That's one of the questions we've asked, because Sarah did an extensive, you know, when we worked on this last year, and Sarah did an extensive research, and that other human rights, you know, commissions here in Massachusetts do have that authority.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I'm really interested in reading that.
Yeah, yeah. So he has, so that is, you know, that was in particular because, you know, otherwise, you know, when we look at ourselves as a Human Rights Commission, if somebody needs to, you know, wants to discuss an issue, but if there is no area that they can have where they can have privacy and confidentiality, it almost makes us in somewhat mute, because we have no, you know, if we have no power to be able to allow a person to file a complaint and allow us to do some investigation and, you know, other kinds of things, it's almost like, well, what is it? You know, there are certain things that we can do, but to me, the ultimate, you know, one of the goals of the Human Rights Commission is to be able to address issues like that.
Well, maybe one of the, just came to me today, and I just a second, maybe one of the aspects that can be done now in relation to what the existing Human Rights Commission and our city website is, be a source of resources, and maybe come up with, you know, if I'm if I'm being discriminated against on rental things, where do I go? What's my process? If I'm, you know, being persecuted by, you know, whatever. I mean, there's got to be a list of resources that we can make available that we don't have to act on individually as a body, but where we can refer to people to and become an educational resource for them in the meantime.
Right. And in our discussion last month, that, you know, looked at the Danvers, the town of Danvers Human Rights and
Webpage, yeah.
and their webpage is incredible, which has a lot of, you know, things that are listed in regards to that people can click on and refer.
And it's public, so we can steal it.
Public, yeah, well, but, you know, but, you know, I mean, they have a separate page, and I think, you know, and when we look at our, you know, the city webpage, it's not it's not user-friendly.
Well,
Yeah.
and
It
most human
can
rights-
be. It can be, because for instance, the HR department's website, the websites are all the same, but you can click in and pop into the city port, the employee portal, which takes you to a whole different, pieces and parts, just like we're talking about. If you're looking for information on health insurance, you click
Yeah.
here.
Uh,
So
okay.
it's doable. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's doable, but I mean, I would certainly recommend, and like all, as far as I can tell, and Jason, I can send you like the research I did on these commissions about a year ago, but all of the ones that are very effective, they have their own website, they have their own platform, they have their own intake mechanism, they have sections related to different types of laws, including like housing discrimination, employment, disability, and they have all of those resources listed there. So people can go to them, get all the resources they need, and then, like filing like a complaint would be kind of maybe like a high level step, but certainly I think an external website that's extremely user friendly would be an ideal step for us.
The only thing I would advise on that is that then there needs to be someone who maintains that site. There needs to be, you're getting into a whole thing where you've got an IT department that's already pretty stretched. Are they
Right.
going to have the resources and the time and the willpower to keep up with a site like that? I mean,
Well, I think the commission would have to keep up with a site like that, like, because no matter what, I mean, we'd have to keep up with the resources, update the site. I mean, we'd have to do that either on Gloucester's website or on an external website.
yep, fair. But at least we wouldn't have to rebuild the architecture. But I mean, that's a technical question for IT. I don't, and I don't know what the whether or not there'd be any, not necessarily liability, but what the responsibility would be for the city to maintain that site on its own. Like, I mean, even a basic site costs money, and it's not a lot, but how do you
Right.
pay for that? How do you budget for it and things like that? So it seems like every time there's a lovely little solution, and then there's an entire can of worms right underneath it that you come across. But I'll stop talking now.
Well, yeah, and I think, well, not much about the website, but soon as, I think once we see what the lawyer has to say, what information, because, if we get the feedback in regards to, yes, we can set up a process where there can be confidentiality and other kinds of things, and that will, one, resolve one issue, then figuring out how we set that up for the application and looking at, what, at least maybe what we can do on our own website. And if Holly said that people can at least, in the human resources department, do some clicks on links, if that's, doable. So it doesn't, but as long as it, I think is, I'll go on and look at, because I not having to look for a job, to go on the human resources site and do the clicking to make it, see how easy it is. So, so there might be some wiggle room, but yeah, anything that we look at, and especially since we are a city appointed commission, with a website and liability and all those other kinds of things that kind of, but we're to see, like, maybe how do these other towns, how do they manage it? Because it's also going to be a cost for them,
Yep.
Sarah, can you share with us what you have so far in your draft?
Just the text?
Yeah. I mean, do you have screen sharing capability?
I don't seem to be able to, it says the host disabled screen sharing.
Well, let's see if I can figure out that for you. Okay, you should be able to,
There we go.
okay.
Okay, here we go. Share. Now this is kind of the most basic iteration that I could come up with. Again, some of these are very robust. I figured the path of least resistance might be good for an initial non-discrimination policy. But again, this is a draft. So essentially, most of them have like the purpose, the policy, and then some sort of like bit on enforcement. A lot of them do have definitions for all of these things, but I can just kind of go through this really quickly. Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, here we go, a basic non-discrimination ordinance, and you can please ignore some of my notes on the side. Purpose and intent, it is the finding of the city of Gloucester that no individual should be denied equal treatment or opportunity as a result of their age, ancestry, color, disability, family status, gender identity or expression, military status, marital status, national origin, race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. This specifically, a lot of them are comparable. Some of them have less inclusive language here. I've tried to pick essentially the broadest one that I could find. And then you go into the policy. So it's the policy of the city of Gloucester to uphold the human rights of all persons in Gloucester and the free exercise and enjoyment of any and all rights and privileges secured by the Constitution, laws, ordinances, and regulations of the US, the Commonwealth of Mass, and the city of Gloucester. And that's where you get into like the enforcement piece. As such, actions that may deny or tend to deny an individual equal access or opportunity in matters of housing, employment, education, municipal services, contracts, purchasing, or public accommodations on the basis of any of these things are hereby prohibited. And this is where I think the enforcement mechanism, the legal review come in. So essentially, a lot of these are tied back to the human rights commissions of their cities. So I don't know if this is the way that we would do it, but any person who believes that the facility or facility staff has discriminated against him or her in a violation of this ordinance, and then may file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. But again, this is up to kind of legal review internally, which shall serve as a request to have the commission investigate and mediate the complaint. And Jason, one of the things that you missed historically was that other human rights commissions that I did a lot of research on, they don't have the commission investigate a complaint per se. That commission then essentially directs that to the next legal expert. So if it's housing, it would go to one place. If it was,
Right.
Discrimination. So again.
Yeah, no, I would find it difficult to believe that we could establish our own investigative board of random citizens of the, I think there'd be a whole issue of qualifications and authority and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that is not what other human rights commissions do. They really serve as kind of a referral once a complaint comes in. They are not doing like investigation or mediation per se on their own. They might do mediation, but and then the second is civil action, and that's where it gets into the actual non-discrimination policies of the city or the laws that are related to it. But again, this is a very broad stroke draft, which would have to be tweaked based on our own laws, ordinances, the commission's mandate.
I would like to interrupt just a second and say that the purpose and intent and the policy thing here, I'd like to see that in the civility resolution. I think that beefs up that language a lot, and it is much more specific about why we're signing it in the first place. I mean, we're making a determined statement that we're going to uphold these principles, and so I like that. I like that a lot.
I do too.
Yeah, and that comes straight from a couple of the other non-discrimination policy or ordinances, across the state. But I'm not sure what the next step is. You tell me.
I would think it would be sent to the mayor and then him forward it, just like what we did with our questions with the ordinance.
I think it might be worth setting up a meeting with Greg and the legal department and Jill Cahill, obviously, and maybe just have a conversation about not only what we can do with this as an ordinance or what the city can do in terms of creating an ordinance that the mayor will support, but also how that jibes with the mission and vision of what the Human Rights Commission is, so that there's some synchronicity there.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it actually makes sense, Tony, for us to kind of collaborate and work together on these two kind of points that are moving forward at the same time.
It's
like
Jill Cahill, by the way. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, no problem. You're watching me take notes live. But maybe Tony, like we could work together or loop together to have a meeting like this where we kind of look at these two things at the same time.
I think it makes sense.
I might consider inviting also, if you have this meeting, I'd be happy to attend, but could also invite Val Gilman as the president of the council, since any ordinance is going to have to go through the council process. But if we have a better understanding in advance of why it's being done and what it's accomplishing, then that helps the process a lot more smoothly. Because at every step of the way, we've got to explain it. So
Yeah,
it comes in and we put it forward. It's got to go to O&A, and O&A's got to explain it. So you've got to explain it to 3 counselors there, and then go through the process. And then once they go through it, they then have to explain it to the 6 remaining council that haven't necessarily been involved in it, understanding why it's an important thing to do. And then you go through the public hearing, and then you get a vote. So it's a bit of a meat grinder process, but at any step of the way where you can have sort of enough people at the table where clarity can be achieved at that level, then we can move it down each step of the way.
yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I like it. All right. Who's going to call that meeting?
I'm happy to call that meeting.
That's with a great question mark attached to the end of it.
Well, sorry that sometimes I don't understand how the mechanisms work. Would this have to be like a publicly posted meeting? This is a private conversation. How does
No.
it work?
No, if it doesn't contain a meeting like this would be just strictly as long as it doesn't contain a quorum of any of the entities. Like Val and I could be at the same meeting because this is an ordinance that has to deal with the Human Rights Commission and not planning and development. But we wouldn't necessarily both have to be there. I could be there, she could be there. It doesn't really matter. You wouldn't want a quorum of the Human Rights Commission to be there because that would be a violation. So as long as you just have your representative, then you can have a meeting where you can actually have a conversation that is pretty straightforward. And then, it doesn't have to be secret what's going on there. It's just you don't have to post it and go through that issue. Then you might you want to take minutes, keep minutes, but mostly those kinds of conversations are perfectly acceptable to have as a building a framework on which you're going to then do a public process with.
So we can have 2 members. So if you were attending, then you would be attending as in your role. Well, I mean, you're here as your role as a city councilor. But if we had that, we'll just
As
say
a non-voting member, I don't know that I matter. I don't know. That's a good question to ask.
Sarah, just let me tell you that May 13th will be the last day of our general council, and the new general council starting on the 23rd, I think. So you might want to give them a little time to get their feet wet. So to have
I say throw her in the deep end. Come on, Holly. Don't mollycoddle.
It would be helpful for me. I mean, I think to come to something like this a little bit more prepared. I mean, I could do a little bit more research, try and pull out like the best, like the things that are most related to the city of Gloucester, because obviously like there's cities like San Francisco that just have these like broad sweeping ordinances that are tied to so many different mechanisms. And that's not something that is realistic for us, but I could try and point to a couple more examples of that we could emulate.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't get Krishna before she leaves. You're going to want the new general counsel to walk you through this whole process. She's not starting until the 23rd, I think.
And just to add, my guess is that you have this meeting and the council is going to want to then go and do their own research to find out what fits in, what we can and can't do, and how that can be articulated in our own ordinances. I wouldn't expect to meet before June, because I think you're right, Holly. I think it would be, there's a lot of wheels spinning that has to get up to speed so she can have a grip.
And that's not, I mean, in my book, this is kind of a longer term process, because, making an ordinance like this for our city is actually a significant shift. It's a big deal. So obviously it would take time to get this right.
Yeah, I don't think there's a need to rush it. At the same time, we don't have to, I mean, it's obviously important enough that you're thinking about it. So,
Right. And in the meantime, I'm sure, before then, we'll get the, we should get the feedback from from the lawyer in regards to what was already sent with questions about the ordinance. Hopefully, maybe, since that was sent last month.
I doubt it.
Okay, well,
Yeah. I think if what Holly says is so, I think you're going to find that the transition period is going to be a little bit,
All right.
maybe time for them to, the old one's going to leave, the new one's going to come in, and it's be like, what are we dealing with here?
well, that's good to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be surprised anyway.
Okay.
Maybe Kristen is going to wrap everything up with a big bow before she leaves, but
Yeah,
I imagine there's a lot of bows to be tied.
yeah.
Right.
But before we move on, since we talk, are we going to, I know that the school committee is making, revisions to the contract form, for the schools to, for renting. Are we going to be able to get to see a copy of that to ensure that they have because that form did not have a non-discrimination clause, unlike the city's contract form.
Yeah, I don't think it's been written yet, but they, at their last meeting, which was, I think, a subcommittee meeting, which I watched, they're working on that
Okay. Their work,
with the other lawyer.
okay. And was
Greg.
it,
I forget his
Okay.
last name.
okay. Okay. But even after they're working on it, will we have the opportunity to review and provide feedback?
Yeah, if we want to, I can ask Melissa Texera.
Yeah, I think that, since people approached us with their concerns and we, we investigated, we, informed, we had, and then of course, not only was it just us, but the school committee, but since I think that it would be, and it's really, when we're talking about non-discrimination, I think issues like that, at least, I think we should play some kind of a role. Whether it's we
Okay.
just review it just to see if to ensure it's there or not, but
Feel a little steppy on toes, but
Well, that's the other thing. If it's part of the ordinance, I mean, what do you put this notice on everything? Is it only on a building use form? Where do we start? Where do we stop? How many, there's a lot of forms that go out, any kind of permits, stuff like that. I mean, where do we start and stop adding that, clause to something if it's an ordinance?
well, but I think when we look at the ordinance and then there's the contracting piece, and I think that one of the issues that, arose with the schools was that in regards to if you, if
Right.
you contract with an entity where they have, they've explicitly said that, they don't, maybe not discriminate against, but they, object to, certain groups of people, and you would want to have that if they're you would want to have that in the contract. In regards to every other kind of form, I don't know what,
I mean, contract form, for purchase and sales and all kinds of things that we do. I mean, I'm gonna step back. I'm not somebody, but I can see where, where do we
right.
stop telling people what they can do? They're pulling permits with us, do we get into this with them at that point? But I'm gonna just step back.
Holly, does
That's-
purchasing have a contract? Does it have language in our contracts to deal with vendors? I mean, why would that be any different than
Yeah.
anybody else?
Yeah.
Tony has seen it, yes, that
Right.
it does, yep.
Yes.
So why wouldn't they just adopt that as a general rule
Right.
and just say, for any transactional issue, that should be fairly straightforward. In terms of other things, I mean, they would all be transactional, because the only time you would come up with a situation like that is if you want to rent space in the schools, yeah? I mean,
I
or,
don't know, what about people coming in to put performances on in the library and, people that, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud there,
Mhm,
I like the idea of an ordinance, but. Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think
I do agree that it should be on the form. I'm just worried about where do we, Where do we end that?
Right.
Do we have to end it?
I was gonna say, can it go
Right,
on
it
every
should be
forum?
on everything, but I don't know that it will be, yeah.
I mean, you could just, I mean, as far as language is concerned, you could simply say that, you know, in order to be in compliance with this permit, you have to accept the terms of, you know, ordinance, blah, blah, you know, GCO, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be written out, but I mean, if that's a concern, but yeah, it should generally apply, I think, across the board. You know, we're not, you know, I do respect that there might be free speech issues on that front, which is, you know, we run into as well. But I think in transactional things, I think we have a lot more control of that.
Mhm.
We don't have to do business with people who are racists. We can't necessarily tell them they can't be racist, but we don't have to do business with it, you know.
Right, and that's where the signing the contract is that, you know, if this is your beliefs, you have, you know, every right to have your beliefs, but when you wanted to be doing business with the city,
Right.
you know.
Here's
And renting property, and
right,
renting the,
property, then,
and Stage 4 Park and the beaches and everything,
Yeah.
that, you know, City Hall and.
right. But in
We
your
do a lot-
personal and everything like that, as long as, you know, outside of, you know, whatever the contracting is within this, you know, in the city or renting, whatever, you must comply with this.
And it may be that an issue if someone were having a public event where they were having speeches, you'd probably not be able to get into the realm of controlling. Well, you
What they
couldn't get in the
no.
realm of controlling the speech, but that's, you know, that's,
But that's a free speech.
and yeah, so that's a tricky issue, you know.
They're still renting space.
Maybe they are. I mean, if you get a permit for Stage 4 Park to have an event, you may not have to comply with that. I don't know. I mean, that's a question for the lawyers.
Well,
Right.
or looking at what's in the permitting, you know, what do they sign when they get a permit?
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we want to be really careful about that one. That's
Yeah.
one that could come back and bite the city. But I think in contractual language, you can definitely say we don't.
That's
we're not
right.
gonna- So we need to find out where the fine lines are.
Good. Thank you, Sarah, for your work on that. And thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
All right. Jason, civility resolution.
Yes. Yes, indeedy. Well, as I mentioned to you last evening, I had a nice little conversation. I've been up to my eyeballs in zoning issues of late. But I did look around. There's, you know, a lot of the civility resolutions that I looked at were, you know, kind of, we agree to be nice to each other. We agree not to say bad things to each other. And I just felt that, you know, if we're going to tie this into the mission of the Human Rights Commission and the idea of being a place where we can actually address issues of incivility and you know, violations of people's rights, that it had to have a little bit more teeth. But I do like the language that you had in the policy that you showed us earlier, and I think that might, you know, incorporate that into the language. And then I think I added kind of just a simple line. Let me find it here about. Let me find it. What did I do with it?
It says complaints to the Gloucester Human Rights Commission will be forwarded to city administration and if necessary to the proper legal authorities to investigate and resolve.
Yeah, and that I still like that idea. The question is, how do we handle receipt of complaints? Because you know, there is the issue of being a public body, and do we have any authority to receive complaints specific to, you know, to be acted on, or do we I think that's a tricky issue, and I think we need to have a weigh in with the city attorney on where our boundary line is. But I think that even if that's not allowed to be in there, I think the idea of adding a little bit more forceful language about what the policy of the city is and you know, what we specifically don't stand for is pretty good. And I'd like to play with that language that you you had in your other presentation, and see if I can figure a way to add that in there a little bit so that it kind of bulks up the purpose of why we had this in the first place. Otherwise, I'm just, the question I was asking somebody earlier is, what is the role of the Human Rights Commission at some point? Is there any authority there? I mean, we've got permitting boards, you've got health boards, you've got all these boards that can do things. But what can we do, and what can the Human Rights Commission do? And I think that's an important question, I think, to ask the mayor in terms of what his vision is. But it's also, we need to find out where and if there is any authority for this body to act, with some gravitas, I guess. I mean, and if not, then that's fine. What it comes into is being an educational source, I know you're shaking your head, and I agree with you. It's like that's also important, but it would be nice to know that. It'd be nice to know what is possible and what's not possible within the framework of our ordinance and other ordinances, and see if we can craft something that is got some bite to it. I don't know, maybe not. I don't know.
I have a quick question. Can you guys
Hi,
hear me?
Michelle. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I have a quick question based off of what you just said, Jason. Do we have a consensus on what we want to be? Because
That's a
I
good
personally
question.
don't want to be an educational. I think that might be some pushback with that question to the mayor. Do you have a consensus on what you want to be? I would love for us to have a little more action and kind of push when it comes to holding people accountable for the complaints or issues that we receive.
I
Then
feel like
it
we're
would be
aligned
much.
on- Oh, sorry, Michaela.
Okay. Sorry,
sure,
I didn't mean
agree.
it. I missed a big portion, but I think that might be some pushback. So I just want to make sure that that's something that we address, that we are aligned in what we want to accomplish as a group.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I look at even the Arts Commission has authority over what art is demonstrated in or displayed in public spaces. I mean, everybody seems to have their niche of what they have some control over, except the Human Rights Commission, which would seem to me something that would be fairly important, in terms of the fact that we're all humans and we all have rights and they need protecting. So
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, Michelle, I think we're all very much on board with what you said.
Okay, perfect, great.
I get the next question, and not to be Debbie Downer here, but what if the answer is we don't want you to be anything more than an educational board? I mean, is that, how do you react to that? And maybe you don't have to say anything tonight, but I would think about, what does that mean in terms of whether or not, the board is there any there? And, I'd like to say that there is. I think it's an important thing to move forward. So I think we're going to have some interesting conversations with the administration about that, and also then ultimately with the council to convince them of the need and import for it. But I think some of the legal questions have to be answered, not necessarily first, but pretty soon, so that you know which way you're headed. Because if you're going to become this thing over here and you've got a legal authority, great. But if you're not going to get the legal authority, then you have to go this way. Then you got to decide, well, what is it that we are? And I'm jumping into this. I apologize. I'm going to say this. I apologize because I have been to this is my second meeting, and I've got all these things I'm yakking at you about. But I guess I'm only coming in from the perspective of the outside, and I don't mean this to denigrate the work that you've already put into this. I feel like you have put work into it. I just want to see it, elevated to the point where it has some community substance and some recognition in terms of its import in the community. So if I tend to overstep or step on toes, I apologize. That's kind of what I normally do anyway.
I feel
No,
like
it's good, Jason,
Yeah.
that you,
And I think it's what the commission members want, which is exactly why Tony has gone and, redrafted the ordinance, why we discussed having an ordinance with a lot more teeth to begin with, what we did research on what other human rights commissions, what kind of their mandates were. So I think that we are aligned, and I think because we have a new administration, this is the time to push all of it.
I would agree with that.
Push.
I also agree.
Great. So we'll see, Sarah, you'll keep us updated in terms of a meeting.
Yeah, so I mean, I
Um,
think it strikes me like a next step, at least for me, would be to send you this kind of draft language, Hannah, which you can then distribute. And then, I can obviously touch base to try and set up a meeting. It sounds like that will be at least a couple weeks out at the very earliest, but I'd love to get that in motion at the same time as Tony is working to get this legal review of an updated ordinance. So we'll all kind of, I don't know, hopefully move around the same time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That would be great. And would you mind also emailing the first part of that to Jason so he can
Feel
check
it?
out? Mhm.
I mean, check it out.
Yeah, and maybe stick it into the civility resolution as you see fit, Jason.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that would be very helpful and save me a lot of time finding
Great.
that language. Also, I'm
All
going
right.
to take a look at those other communities and see what they have to say.
And Jason, I can email you, when the points and the questions that I raised in the ordinance, when I reviewed the ordinance that I sent to the mayor, so that you can see that.
That'd be lovely.
Okay, so we all have a bit of homework, which is good. I like giving homework because I'm a teacher. That's what I
could
do.
Then you have to read papers afterwards.
I know. All right, do we have any other further business?
Yeah, I just want to bring up, I think I had emailed you, Hannah, is that, and we did, I think last week or last month when we talked about, we've been seeing this really sad issues that being sweeping through the country in regards to banning books, banning the teaching of CRT. I mean, when making students almost sounds like we're in, the Soviet Union, reporting on teachers if they're doing such. So I was wondering if, because to think that couldn't happen here would be naive. So I was wondering, so I did email the superintendent to find out whether or not he has been approached by any parents or members of the public. In his reply back to me, he said it's just been a few people, and he's explained what CRT is, but it's but there's been very few. I have been playing back, voicemail tag back and forth with the library, to find out what's been happening at the library, if there's any issues. People have been asked to remove books. I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine who is in Waltham, and apparently earlier this year, there had been certain groups of people that had wanted certain books on gender identity pulled out of the library. And the process in Waltham is that when anybody has a question about books, is that they put a committee together to do a review, and then that has to be presented to the school committee to make the determination about the books. But at the school committee, there were so many students that came in and talked about either themselves or their friends and the importance of keeping those books in the libraries there, that of course nothing, they were kept. So I thought that was very, interesting. And, so I do want to email the superintendent back and saying, just kind of find out what is the process about if someone, makes a request, to pull books out. When I did get the voicemail message I did get from the librarian was that she's going to send me, they have a process where I guess if people raise questions about a book that, what the policies are. So I'm going to be getting that. So I just wanted to, let people know what I've been working on that. because it's just, it's so discouraging. I thought, I mean, some of you probably weren't even born at the time, but some of you may have know about the term banned in Boston. And that was something where Boston did ban books back in the early 20th century.
Huh.
Well, maybe not even that. I think maybe in the 1950s. So I thought maybe that had been gone by the wayside, but unfortunately that has not.
What's old is new again.
Right. One
Yeah.
of the electives I teach is banned books.
Ah,
So we just read all the books they're not supposed to.
well, I mean, this is going to show, my age, but probably everybody's familiar with the group Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin got banned in Boston in 1970 because there was some objections to some of their lyrics and how they performed on stage. So from the Boston Garden.
How'd that work out for them?
They did not play Boston Garden at that time.
Bummer.
Well, thank you, Tony, for that. All right. No further business? Okay, shall we adjourn? Someone want
I
to
have
move
a
that we
hand.
adjourn?
I have somebody raise their hand.
Oh, okay. Can you call
Um,
on them?
Yeah. Patty,
Oh, hi, thank you for recognizing that.
can can you state your name for the record, please? I
Yes,
think it's a
ma'am.
name and address, right?
Yes, it's
Yes.
Patty Page,
Mm-hmm.
3 Tidal Cove Way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that. I have been hearing about the critical race theory. I didn't know you were going to discuss or had anything to do with your committee. Can you explain it to me? Maybe, I'm sure just briefly. I didn't know there was any connection between that and human rights, and we're just hearing it in the community here. So I don't know anything about it. I have no school-age children, but I'd like to know what you know about it, or briefly explain to me what this is.
I can give you a stab at that, Patty.
Thank you. I'm
Um,
sure it's very broad, Hannah, but it just happened to come up in your discussion here.
Sure. So critical race theory is sort of a theory that originated in law schools. Don't ask me the person who, I can't think of the name right now. But the idea is that US sort of institutions like the criminal justice institution is embedded with racism, right, within laws and rules and regulations. So that's the critical race theory. It's not taught in our public schools because it's law theory. Does that make sense? Patty?
Thank you for asking. You're telling me that it originated in law school as you said it was embedded with racism, its rules and regulations.
It's a theory that proposes that the law is embedded in racism. Does that make sense?
Racism is embedded in law.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So racism is embedded in all law?
No, not
across
necessarily.
the board, or what particular area of law would that be? Sorry, I don't really know anything about this.
I think this may be an opportunity for the education portion of the Human Rights
Yes.
Commission. I was thinking that
That's a
we
great
could probably
idea.
pull together, Patty, some basic resources. I think it's pretty complicated. And I know that critical race theory really evolved out of the civil rights movement. And it's not all law, but laws that might have to do with affordable housing or the prison pipeline or healthcare, education. And so I think that there are truly a lot of resources about this, but maybe we can pull together some of these to put on our site. If it
Yeah,
would
that's
be-
a great idea, Sarah.
I just want to follow up with that, Sarah. I think that's something that we talked about with Tony in terms of how many things, the thing that we could provide to the Juneteenth this year. And we were discussing that we could not only come up with some kind of frequently asked questions from the community, but kind of help people get that base knowledge of some of the buzzwords or hot topics that they're hearing that can be very divisive in the news and throughout society. So that was one of the things that we talked about putting together, not only posting on our portion of the website for the city, but also maybe handing out flyers or having a table at the Juneteenth celebration where we can kind of disseminate some of the things that people are thinking and things that really get them spun up over something that it's really not about. That's kind of already in progress. I'm sorry I'm late, but that's something that we
Michelle-
had discussed. It's on the list of things.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Michelle, I love all of that. And so you've just been recruited to work with me. I had asked
Lord, for
earlier.
me too.
I
think-
asked earlier before you got here if someone would work with me on the Juneteenth educational
Oh,
component.
I would absolutely love to, Hannah. Count me in.
Right.
Well, wait, you didn't like say that I'm going to be working with you. So, but you know, I have a question. You know, this is I think where it kind of rolls is where is our role as a Human Rights Commission, because you know I've been thinking about maybe this is something too that we can we have, you know, put something in and have it printed in the Times, you know, like you have people do these columns, you know, you have, I don't know if it's weekly or monthly, you have, you know, there's the members of the clergy write something. You know, you know, to me, this would be a perfect thing for the Human Rights Commission to kind of like put a little bit in the newspaper in very, you know, in language that the everyday person can, you know, because reading legal text, even I wouldn't be able to figure it out. But since we know that with all this discussion going on and what's happening, you know, across the United States, is that for us to be a little bit more like that we're, you know, we're taking things, you know, I'm trying to think of the word here, but that, you know, we'll, you know, instead of waiting for us to react, we're being proactive, kind of like, okay, we know people have already got these questions, and thank you, Patty, for bringing that up. This is wonderful. Thank you for coming to our meeting. So that, you know, because there's going to be a lot of people, what does that mean? I don't really understand it. And so, and how it does tie in and, you know, try to deal with all the, you know, all the misinformation. You know, because that's what happened. Misinformation just takes over.
I do think
A couple of quick things. I wanted to add, if I could, I hope I'm not wrong on this, that part of the reason critical race theory is being talked about now is because it's the idea that we're challenging what was effectively the white dominant narrative of history and the entire creation of this United States. And so it's a challenging of these stories that were written effectively by the winners, and allowing for some awareness that what we've learned as a history has effectively been whitewashed since day one, and that there are other narratives that are relevant and accurate and true, and those have been suborned by the dominant narrative, which is basically, you know, white Christian culture. So that's another aspect of what CRT involved and why people feel it's controversial, is the idea that we're somehow challenging the notion that maybe we weren't as perfect a nation from the very beginning as we like to think ourselves as. It's, you know, it's recognizing that Thomas Jefferson, you know, had relationships or you know, with his slaves. It recognizes that, you know, we destroyed indigenous cultures, and that is something that some people find very objectionable because it challenges their notion of who they are.
But I don't know that that's racist theory. I mean, critical race theory. I think that that's just good teaching.
Well, No,
Right.
no argument for me on that, but I think that's
So-
that's why it's come up, is that people
Right.
have started teaching things that are outside of the standard history books. And I think
Right, but
that's,
we've been doing that for decades, and critical race theory just came up this summer for the first time, and all the kids in high school came back from their summer breaks asking what it was.
Mm.
And then that gave all the teachers the opportunity to talk about it, right? But what we teach is, yes, there were lots of veterans who came back after World War II, and the Black veterans were denied the GI Bill,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that's not critical race theory. That is just the truth.
It's
Well-
not.
Um,
It's not critical race theory.
Well, you know,
That's history.
Yes.
but you know
But no,
what?
I agree with
Those
that.
are
I
facts.
agree with that.
You know
That is
what?
not theory at all. Those are facts.
Exactly, exactly.
And you know what? It's all got wound in, from the former administration in regards to the 1619 project and, really putting, recognizing, history, because we all, and I look at, I'm on the Gloucester 400th, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. And one of the things now has been changed. It's now the Gloucester 400th plus, because it's going back and recognizing that Gloucester, people living in Gloucester before the Europeans set foot on there.
Mhm.
And so we're looking at to include the indigenous people, the role that the Black people, have played in the history of the United
Right.
States. So we've made that adjustment. But when the 1619 project was published and then all that, then that's where I think they've gotten that, like they've tagged on to this critical race theory, because, it's like when you're recognizing, just like, women's voices, looking at, you start to read history of parts where you never, they played role in it. And so like it's, teaching the history of making sure it's inclusive of all voices and all experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the warts.
Yeah, that's good teaching.
Right, but in
Yeah.
what we've been having in our discussions though, in looking at understanding what the curriculum is how, what is being taught,
Right. So
and,
maybe the idea is to separate out that's the educational component, right? That Michelle was talking about, separating out what critical race theory is, as in it's a theory, to what we teach in the school curriculum.
Well, thank you for this. Yeah, I can see that everybody seems to have a little bit different take on it. So I do appreciate if the Human Rights Commission would take this up as an educational piece, whatever you post or whatever program you decide to put through there. I think that would be a really helpful piece, because again, I just happen to hear it mentioned. I've been hearing it throughout. I don't know. I don't have children in school again. But Tony mentioned, I think I heard two things, that CRT is not in the Gloucester public school system. Did I hear that correctly?
no, and just like what Hannah was saying is that the human, CRT is an academic research that's taught in law schools. So, but,
Okay.
Higher education, not
Higher education.
not K through 12.
right.
You have to be, I think, maybe even like master's or your junior year of college. It's not something that would be taught in public school ever.
Thank you. Okay, then what is this gender orientation we're referring to that you mentioned about Waltham?
Well,
Is that part of CRT? Is it not part of CRT? Again, I'm not.
no, it's separate, but when we're reading to see what's happening where, in a number of states in this country where they're banning books that are, are dealing with, populations, like students that are trans, gay, their gender identity, and and banning those topics being taught, banning books that students can be able to read, and so, but it's all, the thing is it's all like in one little cauldron. We got, and again, I think they're using critical race theory, but they're looking at really it's the teaching of understanding that that how, that's, the history of the enslaved people and that looking at, the indigenous, the history of the indigenous and understanding the history of, the role that has not been included in history. And so by including that there, and it brings up, we have to, facing, and every country has, every history, every group has some really ugly parts of the history, and looking at it, and it's, and really understanding and showing it's, instead of having it not even spoken, not even addressed. And so what's happened, in the way I'm looking at it is that people, it's kind of like, oh, we don't want that to be taught. We don't, either you don't agree with it, or you find that those topics are just too, out there, and only want to continue to teach the one way that, everybody's been taught, and so what it is though, it's targeting groups,
Hannah,
you
you
know-
mentioned you're a teacher. Are you a teacher in the Gloucester school system? I'm sorry, I don't know your background.
No,
here.
I teach in Wenham.
Oh, okay, but that's really local. All right. So what I'm hearing is CRT is a higher level academic theory. That I get that. I'm still not clear about this gender identity thing. That seems like that's in the school, but I think what Tony is saying is it's a support piece for children that are of a gender identity, to support their gender identity, I guess I'll say.
Oh, yeah, so you have books, so you have, if you, you can go into the library and, and your parents, are both women, and so I've not read these books, but there was the book, Heather Has Two Mommies, so that they can come in and they're reading books of their family, the way their family
Dynamic.
that is, because otherwise, if it's only, always, a man and a woman, and they have their children, and that's the only thing, but you're like, well, wait a minute now, that's not my family. And then it becomes, is my family wrong? Is my family bad? But when you have a book and other thing that whether, that you have, and it's like, oh, this represents me. And it's the same thing. It's like, what kind of books do we have that represent people of color?
Sure, yeah, I hear what you're saying. There's access to relatable material.
You
uh,
get that.
for-
Exactly.
okay. Now, are there any professional development that teachers attend for this?
I think you'd have to ask the school system those
Yeah.
questions, Patty.
The school
Yeah.
committee, maybe?
Oh, the
Yeah.
food board.
Okay.
Because I know that we've asked in the past, Hannah, if we could have more information about if, say, for example, what's done around like Black History Month, or maybe Native American Heritage Month, or are things touched upon for Pride? And we didn't get much response from the school committee in terms of, are
Right.
these things talked about, obviously in an age appropriate way? It's not saying one way is wrong or one way is right, but like Tony said, giving people access to seeing their culture or their family or their heritage talked about, spoken about in a positive light in school. Are these things part of the curriculum or no? Like we haven't had any information on that.
Right.
And we have
And I
asked
think the
for it.
last time was when Jen asked, well, we have not asked the school committee. I don't think anyone's
Oh,
contacted the
okay.
school, but Jen had asked
The
the
school
superintendent,
administration.
right, for a meeting.
Okay, yeah, okay.
CRT is separate, and gender orientation or identification, that is, you're saying it's more of a library access for children in
Well, I think
school
those would be
that would-
questions for the school, Patty, or for the library. Does that make sense?
Right, I appreciate you clarifying this, because I thought it was all one big lump. I
Right, well,
again, didn't know.
we don't,
Um,
we're not associated with the schools or the library.
Right, okay, so, no, thank you, because so you guys are talking about CRT, but now you're telling me that's a theory that is that's more adult, so we're just talking about, I'm just trying to put it all together. It does have to do with discrimination and racism and that kind of thing, so that's where that falls into your purview. Maybe
Yeah,
Tony spoke a little bit about.
Patty, I think that
again- Sorry?
I think Tony brought up those two specific examples of looking at ways that we can see, for example, if someone said they wanted to ban a book, how would they go about that in Gloucester? Is that possible? So that we understand if we're seeing, if things start coming up where people ask for books to be banned because of it doesn't fit their religious reasons or they have different political views or whatever the case may be, I think it's a really important that we know how that mechanism works so that we can advocate for the communities that would be directly affected by a book being banned. I think that's how those two topics came up, even though we don't necessarily have any say on the school board or the school committee. These are just things that we are aware of and that we're kind of learning more about the process so that if it comes to us from a community member with an issue, we have a little bit more knowledge on how it works. Right, Tony?
Right, yeah, so we're being proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
So, because by looking, you're seeing, what's happening, well, throughout over the country, and and just again talking to my friend and what happened in Waltham. So it's not, so what we want to do, and it may not arise here in Gloucester, but if in the event that it does, then we'll already have the tools available, or the understanding the process instead of having to take the time, like how is the process if somebody asks for a book to be banned? Is there a process right now? How does that go through? So that we have that. And if we're having people asking questions and they want particular books or something like that, that are really are focused on one particular population, then that is our role as a Human Rights Commission going, well, wait a minute now, this kind of, there should be no discrimination at all. I mean, if any group is targeted, that's our role is to, look at what's happening and investigate and provide support.
Okay, and I can see some of these lines get a little blurred because, and it probably rightfully so. First, and I appreciate, you saying the professional development and the book idea is school committee, but then you as a commission are looking at, well, if there's a complaint, it almost seems to me like that needs to stay on the school side and you guys are on the discrimination side. I don't know.
But we still need to know how it works.
Well, yeah.
In order to
that's right.
advocate for someone, you need to know how it works because we all, none of us know how it works right now. So we're kind of all
Okay.
speculating.
Okay, yeah, and I don't either, but there's a lot of hot topics here in our communities these days around this, and I don't like to make any decisions. I like to be educated about it. So we'll
Great.
see.
Yeah. We'll be
where it
happy
goes.
to put something together.
Yeah, well, you guys are gonna cover the CRT piece. It sounds like the gender orientation is a school piece. But
Well,
if you,
it really is. I mean, I think again, Patty, and thank you so much for it. This is really very helpful to us too. Is that we're looking at it, it's really all inclusive because if there's, and I think people have latched on to CRT because it's really kind of, it's a word out out in the atmosphere versus really it's looking at, and as Jason, has said, looking at, including in history, all the groups where, and some people are like, I don't want that to be changed. Or then some people have objections to that. So it's really, it's not, they're all in the same kettle.
Okay.
So again, well, we really want to just, I mean, we don't have any authority to say to the school that they can't, pull a book out, but we want to understand the process, because if the books that are being requested are from one certain population, then it is our role as a Human Rights Commission, because, we're here to ensure that the right to support the rights of everyone, in this community. And so that's where, it would be our role to look at, well, why are you only banning books for this one particular group? What is,
Right.
that would,
I mean,
that-
yeah, that's something we can work on our end, but Patty, I also encourage you to do some of your own research. There's lots and lots of research out there already. But I do appreciate your.
Yeah,
your
no,
input.
again, Hannah, I appreciate it. You said you're a teacher, Tony brought it up. I didn't know what role human rights played, if any. It wasn't a question I had on my mind coming into the meeting, certainly. And I understand, do the research. Who knows what the research is today? Honestly,
I think,
yeah, I don't want to get the wrong information, that's all.
right, you know what, and since it's very, it would be helpful, I think, if we, we as on the Human Rights Commission can, find materials that are, so not so academic that you need to have at least 3 PhDs to be able to understand what it is, because you get lost in that. You want to have something that really explains it in a very, easy to read language.
Right. So I think we're getting a bit off track.
Yeah, no,
now.
thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All righty. Thank you, Patty. Is there anything else before we adjourn? Yes, Jason.
Sorry, I apologize. I should have brought this up during the talking about the ordinance, but there is nothing in the ordinance that legitimizes me as a member of this.
Oh, yes.
And
We need to add that in too.
yeah, I think what I came up with, and I think this has to be looked at in relation to other ordinance. I didn't actually go through and look at the other boards and commissions on this, but there's some discussion about how many members there should be. And what I came up with is that there shall be a city commission known as the Gloucester Human Rights Commission, hereinafter called the commission, which shall consist of up to 9 members, but no less than 7, appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council to serve without compensation. The commission may have, in addition, 1 alternate member appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council, 1 ex officio member selected by the majority vote of the commissioners, and this, I add this, and 1 city councilor appointed by the city council president to serve as an ex officio non-voting liaison to the city council. I'm happy to buff up that language, but I based on what we talked about, Hannah, I thought that was kind of in the general realm. Is that, that's something that we can do. I mean, you're going to decide whether we do a full redo of the Human Rights Commission ordinance, or we start with this and legitimize me. But I don't know what the will of the commission is, what we'd like to do in that term.
Yes, I like adding that in. What
Okay.
does everyone else?
Here's the 7 and 9 work. I mean, right now it's 9. I don't know, Holly, do you know if other boards do a sort of sliding scale of whether or not there's 7, 8, or 9, or 5, or 6, or 7 members? No. Okay, I'll look up.
We originally were 7, and then a question was raised in regards to ensure that we have more diversity on the commission, and to be able to increase the number of positions, and so which is what we did. So that's why I went up to 7 and 9, and then of course then it went to I don't know if it goes in, I imagine went back to the ordinance commission or committee, and then the city council voted on it. So to me, that having to ensure that oversight about having a city council representative on us, including that in the ordinance, that would be an a change that could be done very easily, since we're able to easily do the increase of the number of board members.
Yeah, I just didn't
Instead-
want to submit this as a, without,
That- Yeah, I mean,
I
and
think you would, I think what the commission needs to do is approve this language as a commission, and then I can then take it and submit it to the council. I might want to check before that whether or not there's other boards that have, multiple ranges of membership, and what the language is for the non-voting liaison committee member, but I can send that to you after I have another run at it. Is that okay?
Yeah, do we
that'd
need
be
to
great.
make a motion to?
I think
approve
you'd
this,
probably
Jason?
want the actual language that you're going to submit first.
Gotcha.
And
Okay,
then I'll do that, and
Yeah.
then we can do that next meeting, and we'll get
Next
it going.
meeting. Great.
And then that way you have it in advance to look at it and ponder it.
Great. Okay. Anything else? All right, do we want to make a motion to adjourn?
I make the motion to adjourn.
Great. I will second that. Is there any discussion? All right, we can vote to adjourn. Hannah, yes. Tony,
Yes.
Mayuza,
Yes.
and Michelle?
Yes.
Oh, goodness, we would have been here all night if we didn't hear you, Michelle.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. And we'll roll call out Hannah, Kimberly, Tony,
Yeah.
Mayuza.
Yes.
And Michelle.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
And
good.
our next meeting is,
Our next meeting is in May.
May.
The last Monday of May is the 23rd.
Oh,
The 30th is the holiday. Okay.
Just so you know, I will be in England, and I may or may not be able to bring in, but I will have this information to you in advance of that, and obviously we'll act on whatever you guys end up voting. So I'll be here in spirit, one way or the other.
All right. Have fun in England.
Safe travels.
Yeah. Thank
All
you, awesome people. I appreciate
Right.
you.
Have a
bye.
great night. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.